Before you judge a janitor, make sure he does note down the building. At 22, my dad roasted me in public so hard that Thanksgiving turkey filed a complaint my name is Caleb. And back then I was the janitor in a downtown office building, not exactly the job people put on a vision board. But it paid bills without selling my soul on clearance, and weirdly enough, IWA's proud of it. I like the quiet mornings, the routine, and that tiny superior feeling of leaving a place cleaner than I found it. I wasn't lazy, and I wasn't wandering around like a lost shopping cart. I was saving money slowly, carefully, building a plan so quietly nobody in my family even bothered to ask what I was doing. But to me father, my mop was basically a cloud horn, and my paycheck was the family shame trophy. My older brother Mason worked at a finance firm, wore suits like armor, and flashed his company card like it could summon a yacht. My sister Leah married into money and curated social media posts so perfect, even her salad looked sponsored. They were the golden children, shiny, spotless, and probably laminated exactly the kind of people Dad loved to toast when there was an audience and free wine. That Thanksgiving was when I learned I wasn't the black sheep. I was the invisible sheep holding a broom. It was the usual large extended gathering at my parents' house, turkey roasting, kids screaming, wine flowing, and adults laughing like the volume knob was broken. Showed up with homemade pie and a six-pack, because apparently I still believed in emotional coupons, and as usual, no one really acknowledged me beyond a distracted "Hey Caleb." Dinner was loud, messy, and Dad sat at the head of the table like if Thanksgiving had a CEO. He loved an audience the way influencers love ring lights every holiday. He'd raise his glass and toast to something familiar, the good old days. But this time, he went off script and straight into villain monologue mode to the kids who actually made something of themselves. He said, grinning at Mason and Leah, to hard work that actually goes somewhere, and to never ending up cleaning toilets for a living. Remember the pause after he said it? Everyone gave that nervous little laugh people do when a joke just committed a crime. Mason smirked, because of course Captain Spreadsheet had to enjoy the show, and clinked his glass with Dad's. Leah pretended not to hear, but her husband let out a snort and muttered something under his breath. I didn't say anything. I didn't even finish my food. I stood up quietly, left the pie on the counter, and walked out the front door. Nobody followed me. Nobody called. Not that night, not the next day. That moment stuck with Melik, a shot of glass buried too deep to pull out. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it, like I was a disappointment he had to laugh off to make himself feel better, like my life, my choices, my path were just garbage to be swept under the rug. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that the janitor job was never supposed to be the whole story. I had been working nights while taking online business courses. I was learning everything I could about commercial real estate, maintenance, building codes, contracts, zoning laws. Every paycheck I earned from scrubbing toilets and mopping floors went into a savings account that I treated like sacred ground. I had built a timeline, a vision. I wasn't going to be a janitor forever. I just didn't feel the need to broadcast it. Over the years, he showed up to fewer and fewer family gatherings. The invites started feeling more like formalities anyway, mass texts with no warmth behind them. And he didn't mind. I was busy building something real. I bought my first small office building at 26. It was a rundown property, north industrial edge of town, leaky pipes, outdated wiring, the whole 9 yards. But I fixed it. I managed to clean up myself. I put in new systems, got it up to code, brought in tenants, and within a year I was already seeing a return. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. By the time I was 30, I owned 3 buildings and had just started my own property management company. I had a term contractors I trusted, a lawyer on retainer, and a portfolio that was growing faster than I'd ever imagined. I still dressed simply. I didn't post about it. I wasn't trying to prove anything, but I never forgot that Thanksgiving toast, not once. It wasn't until a couple years later that I saw him again in person, not at a family event, not at an author holiday dinner, but sitting outside my office building in the rain, in a wrinkled shirt, holding a manila folder in his lap like it contained the last scraps of his dignity. At first, I didn't recognize him. He'd aged badly. His hair was thinner, his posture hunched. The man who used to fill a room with his voice now looked small. He didn't seem approached, just kept staring at the glass doors like he was unsure if he should even go in. When he finally did look up, our eyes met, and the look on his face, it said everything he knew. But before I say what he wanted, before I explain how it got to that point, you need to understand just how deep the rift in our family ran, how my father's ego, his pride, his need to humiliate and control tore through the years like a slow burning fuse. Because that Thanksgiving Toast was just the beginning. The real phallus started. After that one choice, one snub, one insult at a time, until it all came crumbling down. I didn't stop speaking to my family altogether after that Thanksgiving toast, but something in me shifted. It became quiet, more guarded. Phone calls felt more like obligations than conversations. I kept them short, polite, distant. My siblings didn't notice, my dad certainly didn't, and my mom had mastered the Olympic sport of looking away. Over the next couple of years, the pattern only hardened. Every familiar gathering became the same tired sitcom, minus the laugh track, and plus my blood pressure. Mason would talk about promotions and bonuses like he personally invented capitalism, and Dad would nod with pride, throwing out lines like "that's how you build a future," or "now that's a man with direction." Leah would flash private school photos like tiny tuition receipts in blazers, her husband chiming in with stories about ski trips and backyard renovations. They all talked over each other like the spotlight came with prize money. Me, I sat there sipping water and using fewer words than a fortune cookie, waiting for an excuse to leave. The real breaking point didn't come all at once. It started with little things, tiny cutting remarks Dad couldn't help but throw my way. Still mopping floors, "Caleb, if you'd follow Edmerson's lead, maybe you'd have a corner of his binno. Don't worry, we all bloom in our own way. Some flowers just need a calendar reminder." He never asked what I was doing with my time, never a skit about my buildings, my tenants, or how I quietly went from one property to three while they were busy roasting my mop. And I never told him. It wasn't out of pride, it was out of exhaustion. Why share the truth with people who treat facts like optional toppings? Mom would try to smooth things over with tight smiles and weak chuckles, offering me extra pie, asking if I needed leftovers, as if that somehow made up for being treated like the family footnote in size 8 font. I might have let it all slide forever, honestly. I'd been conditioned since I was a teenager to just take the jabs, nod, and swallow my anger. But then came Leah's birthday dinner, also known as the annual Champagne Olympics. She was turning 35, and her husband rented out a private dining room at one of those restaurants where the menu has more adjectives than actual food. Everyone was dressed like the valet might judge their tax bracket. Leah in a gold wrap dress, Mason in a navy suit. Even Mom and Dad looked polished, like they were prepping for a photo shoot. I wore a clean button down and slacks, nothing flashy, just enough to look respectable. I wasn't interested in pretending I wasn't there to perform. I barely sat down when Dad gave me the once over and smirked. "Didn't have time to change after work?" he asked, loud enough for the whole table to hear. I smiled tightly. "I don't mop floors anymore, Dad." Mason laughed into his wine. "What, you got promoted to head custodian?" I nodded. I didn't want to give them satisfaction, but Leah was always sharper than she let on. "So what do you actually do, Caleb?" She sweetly cutting her steak with surgical precision. "You're always so mysterious. You come and go, never post anything, don't show up to half the family stuff." I shrugged. "I've been busy doing what." Mason pressed. "I mean, it's fine if you're just keeping it simple. Not everyone wants the stress of a real career." And that's when Dad chimed in again, this time lifting his glass to Caleb. He said, the smirk returning, the most consistent one in the family. "Still grounded, still humble, still underemployed. Everyone look at Dev and Mom. Though she looked uncomfortable, it was like they couldn't help themselves, like bullying me had become a tradition." I stood up, not dramatically, just calmly. I looked at each of them in turn, and for the first time in years, I said exactly what I was thinking. "You know what's funny? You all talk so much, but none of you ever ask questions you actually want answers to. That shut 'em up for a moment at least. I own 3 commercial properties," I continued, "imitated them myself. I built a company from the ground up with no loans, no help, and no handouts. I didn't tell you because I didn't need your approval, and I sure as hell didn't want your advice." I left my napkin on the table and walked out before anyone could speak. No yelling, no dramatics, just quiet detachment. For a week, I didn't hear from any of them. Then I got a text from Mom. "Maybe don't go the SNES at your sister's dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration." That was all she said. No apology, no acknowledgement, just another slap wrapped in fake concern. So I stopped replying, stopped showing up. I skipped the next Thanksgiving entirely, went on a weekend trip to mountains instead. Snow, silence, peace. It was the first holiday I actually enjoyed in years. But the silence from my family didn't last. 6 months later, Mason called me out of the blue. "Hey," he said, sounding unusually stiff. "I was wondering if you could meet for lunch somewhere quiet." I was suspicious immediately. Mason never wanted anything that didn't benefit him. "What's going on?" I asked. "It's about Dad." He said he didn't want me to say anything, but he got let go. Company restructuring. He's having trouble finding new work. I blinked. That man had been bragging about his job security since I was a kid, so I said he's struggling when Mom's worried he's not talking to anyone, just sits around the house all day. He's applied to places, but no bites. It's been months. I could hear the hesitation in Mason's voice, the careful way he was building up to something. He saw your name on a building downtown, definitely said one of your tenants. Mentioned you in passing. He was surprised, and then he asked me if I thought you were hiring. I said nothing. Look, Mason said, I am not saying you owe him anything, but maybe just talk to him, even if it's not a job, maybe a referencia, something he's proud of. Okay. But he's scared too. I've never seen him like this. I agreed to meet not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to look the man in the eye and see if he'd say it, to see if he could swallow even a fraction of his pride. That's how we ended up back at the start of this story. My father sitting outside my office building in theory, holding a folder full of resumes for jobs he used to think were beneath him. But before I tell you what happened when I leave him in what he said and how I responded, you need to know what came before that, because right after I walked out of Lee's birthday dinner, also known as the annual Champagne Olympics, the real betrayal hadn't even happened yet. That came 2 weeks later, when I jailed a call from my property manager about a maintenance issue at my newest building. Thinking that smelled less like bad luck and more like somebody touched things, a leaking pipe, a busted lock, and a broken HVAC unit in 1 week, because apparently my building had joined a drama club, things that had just been inspected, things that should not have failed unless karma had Wi-Fi, and then a call from my bank asking if I'd authorized a series of refund requests and cancelled payments from one of my business accounts I hadn't, which led me to check the internal admin software we used for building operations, which led me to see who had logged in remotely, which led me to one very unexpected email address, an old family email address one dad used to have when he helped Mason set up a small investment site. Usago somehow, someway he had gotten into my business systems access enough to sabotage the operations, and when I traced the IP, there was no mistake, it came from my parents' house, and that is when this stopped being family drama and became a full season finale. It did not sleep the night. I confirmed the sabotage came from my parents' house. I just sat there, swallowing words that suddenly tasted licorice in the dark, staring at my laptop. The laptop glow lighting my room like a very depressing crime documentary. The email address, the trace, the system logs, it was all right there. My father had not only disrespected me for years, notably belittled every choice I'd made, but now he'd actively tried to ruin what I built. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I went back and forth with myself. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe it was Mason, maybe the IP was spoofed, maybe someone else used the network. IWAs grasping at anything that would let me avoid the truth, but deep down, I knew it made too much sense. The timing, their precision, the way everything had hit at once like dominoes falling. My father didn't understand much about modern systems, but he wasn't dumb. He was a man who'd once managed an entire department, run audit, handled accounts. He knew how to mess with logistics. He just never used that knowledge against me before, until now. I tried to confront it rationally. I took screenshots, I documented the time stamps, I put security camera footage from the offices to show who hadn't been there when the maintenance requests were logged or accounts assessed. I built a quiet case, not for a lawsuit, at least not yet, but for myself to confirm that I wasn't imagining things, that the betrayal was real. But even knowing the facts didn't make it less. I was hollow for weeks, went through the motions, nodded through meetings, signed papers without reading them twice. My assistant Lila noticed first. She kept asking if I was okay offering to take things off my plate, but I just told her I was tired. She didn't press. She was good like that, knew how to give space with it, leaving me alone. The real blow didn't come from the sabotage itself. It came when I finally drove to my parents' house and walked in unannounced. Mom was in the kitchen frosting cupcakes like it was any other Tuesday. She blinked at me surprised, but smiled. Caleb, sweetie, you didn't say you were stopping by. Want coffee? Where's Dad? I asked it flatly. Her smile faded. He's in Thigarage. What? I didn't answer. I just walked past her through the living room, past the old pictures of Mason's graduation and Leah's wedding. There were no pictures of me on fuels when I opened the garage door. He was sitting at the workbench sorting through a box of old tools like he was waiting for someone. Toned him. He looked up startled, and his face stiffened. Didn't expect to see you, Harry, he said. I held up the folder I'd brought with Mainside with the printouts of the logs, the traces, the screenshots. I handed them to him in silence. He took one look and scoffed. You Camille the way. Here for this? He asked. I waited. He set the papers down on the bench like they bored him. So what if I looked into your Little business thought maybe if you were serious about growing, you could use some structure. Your systems are a mess, Caleb. You're running it like a janitor. My mouth went dry. You accessed my accounts. You triggered false work orders. You tried to tank in confidence. He shrugged. I was testing your setup. You're the one who's always so sensitive. I stared at him, disbelief flooding every cell in me. But you really think this is your version of help? I think you spent too long thinking small. I thought if you saw where the cracks were, you'd wake up and finally let someone with experience help you run things. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so insane, so self-righteous that laughter was the only thing between me and screaming. You didn't help. You sabotaged. You humiliated me in front of the family. And now you break into my systems, and you call it help? I built a career from scratch, Caleb. He snapped. I know how Torino an operation. You lucked into some property and suddenly think you're a mogul. Lucked into it, I whispered. He stood up, towering over the bench, now his eyes flashing. You're not special, son. You're just bitter because your brother passed you by. You always have been. I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I just turned around, walked out, got in my car, and drove away before my mouth ruined my future. That was the last time I spoke to my father face to face for almost 2 years. I wish I could say I instantly turned rage into fuel and built an empire overnight. But life is not a motivational poster with abs. For the first time since I was 17, I seriously consider quitting, selling the buildings, walking away, finding something smaller, quieter, something that would not make me a target in my own family circus, something that wouldn't make me question every choice I'd ever made. But I didn't, because 2 weeks after that confrontation, one of my longest tenured tenants, a pediatric clinic, called me personally. The HVAC unit we thought had been wrecked by the sabotage. I paid to replace it quickly. No drama, no delays, just did the job. And the clinic director wanted me to know how much he appreciated it. You're one of the best building owners we've worked with, she told me. The last guy ignored everything. You show up, you care, and that sentence stuck to me harder than gum under a church pew. I cared. Even when the people who should have clapped were busy throwing tomatoes. Even when my family mocked, made at me, tried to tear me down. I cared about my work, about my tenants, about spaces I was building and maintaining. That meant something. So I poured myself into the business, not with blind anger, but with cold, caffeinated intention. I upgraded security systems, hired an consultant to review every vulnerability. I rebuilt the backend with layered permissions and two-factor authentication, also known as that, proving, updated the tenant portal and created new subs for maintenance teams. I cleaned house top to bottom. Then he expanded, bought a 4th property, then a 5th, opened a CEO working space in an abandoned mid-rise, hired a small team of local contractors full-time, gave them benefits, holiday pie, and real respect, something most landlords never even considered. I didn't just want to grow. I wanted to build something that didn't rely on smoke and mirrors, something real. I started mentoring a few young people too, mostly folks like me, how worked night shifts and saved pennies trying to figure out how to climb. I didn't broadcast it, but I made space for them, answered emails, took calls, showed them what I'd learned the hard way, and slowly, quietly, the weight started to lift. I stopped checking my family's social media, stopped comparing my milestones to Mason's vacations or Lee's curated perfect life. I unfollowed the muted group chats and carved out a life that made sense to me. The buildings became more than just real estate. They became symbols of what I'd survived, what I'd outgrown, and every lease signed, every tenant retained, every system improved. It all felt like reclaiming a little more of myself. But the past has a way of circling back, and 2 winters later, it did that morning. I came in early. The sky was grey, soft flurries falling outside the large glass windows of their downtown office building I'd bought 6 months earlier. The coffee machine sputtered to life in the break room. I was reviewing new leasing agreement when Lila poked her head in. Hey, she said, hesitant as someone outside said he's here about her job. I looked up, confused. To walk in. She nodded back. Caleb, it's your father. I froze, then stood, walked toward lobby windows, and there he was. Same man, same cold smirk softened by years of wear, holding a folder, standing in the snow. I didn't have anywhere else to go. He'd returned, but this time he wasn't there to gloat. He was there to ask for something, and I hadn't I decided if I was going to give it to him. I didn't go out to greet him right away. Instead, I stood there behind tinted glass, arms crossed, watching my father shift his weight from one foot to the other as snow began to collect on his shoulders. He looked smaller somehow, like someone had let the air out of him, not just older, diminished. The confident, commanding man he used to toast over turkey and belittle me with a smile was now just cold, waiting, hoping, and yet I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no anger, no urge to gloat, just a strange Heavy stillness like the silence before a storm you already know is coming. I turned to Lila, don't leave him, and yet her eyes widened. You sure? Yeah. Let him wait a bit. She gave a slow nod and walked her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. I went back to my office, closed the door, sat behind my desk, and let my mind work. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of snide remarks, the public humiliation, the sabotage he tried to frame as help, and now here he was jobless, desperate, standing outside the building I owned looking for a way back into smithing. He had no hand in building. The irony was almost too perfect, but I wasn't interested in petty revenge, not anymore. I wanted something that would last, a message he couldn't ignore, a lesson he couldn't twist into pride. So I started planning. The first thing I did was pull up the folder I kept labeled contingencies. It was where I stored documentation of the sabotage, everything I quietly gathered and filed away after our last encounter back then. I didn't know if I'd ever need it, but something in a part of me could not let it go, and now it felt like a loaded chamber waiting for someone arrogant enough to pull the trigger. I printed a few choice pages, IP logs, access records, timestamps, the paper version of receipts, not everything, just enough to remind him I hadn't forgotten. Next, I called my lawyer, Sam. He was sharp, discreet, and had been on retainer since the second building. I said, hypothetical question, which is lawyer language for please. Don't yell yet. Let's say someone with a history of hostile attitudes. You showed up looking for work, someone who had previously accessed your business systems without permission. Could you legally hire them and also use that contact to secure protections in case they ever tried something again? There was a pause. Hypothetically, Sam asked. Hypothetically, you could, but you'd want an airtight contract, boundaries, and a limited access. Monitoring might even be worth it to create a role just for that. Nothing essential, but enough to keep them close. I nodded even though he couldn't see. We got it, thanks. I'm Caleb, he added, voice low. Usual about this? No, but I'm not planning to offer him a job. I'm planning to offer him a mirror, and maybe a mop with excellent benefits after the call. I reached out to Lila. Bring him in. She hesitated. Want me to sit in? No, this one's mine. I stood as the door opened and my father stepped inside. He looked around the office, the dark wood, the modern furniture, the framed certificates, all the little details that quietly screamed, yes, this is mine, my LLC's registration. He lingered on it a moment longer than necessary, then our eyes met. Caleb, he said, voice scratchy, thanks for seeing me. He gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. He did. There was a long pause, heavy with everything unspoken. He cleared his throat. I know this is unexpected, but I figured I'd try. Things have been hard lately. I said, nothing I do. I know I haven't always been the most supportive. Viewed him looking for something stable. Now thought maybe if you had something. I let Thessalon stretch so long it basically needed its armchair. Then I opened the folder and slid it across the desk. He looked at it and back at me. I remember this, he said softly. So I kept it. I nodded. I keep a lot of things. He didn't open it, just rested his hands on top. I was wrong, he admitted, about a lot. I wanted to believe you were still figuring things out, that I still had time to teach you something, but I see now you built this without me. You don't need my help. No, I said calmly. I don't. He swallowed hard. But you came here anyway. He nodded. I don't have anything open that fits your background, I continued, and frankly, you're a liability. I can risk another breach. His face tightened, but I said I can offer you something. His eyes lifted. I have a new division, property inspections, nothing glamorous, just routine checks, plumbing, HVAC, structural walkthroughs, field work, clipboards, reports, entry-level stuff, contract only, no admin access, no systems, no keys. His face felt just slightly sound beneath you. He shook his head slowly. No, not anymore. I leaned forward. If I bring you on, it's with full monitoring, weekly check-ins, random reviews, any deviation from the route, any missed appointment, and you're out-handed again, smaller this time, and you sign a statement acknowledging your past interference and agreeing to cease all access attempts or communications related to my internal systems permanently. I pulled at the pre-drafted agreement from Sam and slid it over. He took it, read a few lines, then looked up. You already had this ready. I knew you'd come eventually, I said. I just didn't know when. He looked down again, then signed when he handed it back. I didn't smile, didn't shake his hand. I simply stood. Lila will give you your schedule. You start Monday. He rose too, eyes arcing mine for something, gratitude, maybe forgiveness. But I wasn't offering that, not yet. As hesitant to leave, I added one more thing. He looked back. This doesn't change the past. You may be working under Menno, but don't mistake that for acceptance. He nodded slowly, then walked out. I sat back down, heart pounding, not with anger, but with a strange calm clarity. This Wasn't revenge, this was reclamation, but it wasn't over yet, because I wasn't just planning to keep him close, I was going to show him day by day, building by building, exactly what I had built, what he dismissed, what he tried to break, and what could never be taken from me. Again, I didn't want an apology. I wanted him to see truth and live with it every single day. He showed up on time that first Monday, grey jacket, stiff posture, the folder he'd given him tucked under his arm like a schoolboy's homework. Lila handed him the checklist, explained the system, showed him how to scan QR code pasted in each mechanical room, and maintain Sensecurider to verify that he'd completed his inspections. He didn't say much, that they just nodded, listened, wrote, writing down. It was strange seeing him like that, subdued, compliant, quiet. Not once did he comment on the office layout, not once did he suggest improvements. The man who once dominated every room with his presence now barely made a sound. But I knew him too well that silence wasn't humility, it was shame, and the real revenge that came slowly. Every building he was assigned to, every clipboard he carried, was a reminder that he didn't own the empire. He was a part-time field tech in a probationary contract. He was no longer the voice at the head of the table. He was the man who reported to his son, the man who answered made a Thanksgiving toast mocking janitors, was now by every stretch of the imagination doing janitor-level work. And yes, under strict surveillance, the system I put in place didn't leave room for excuses. Every entry point had a camera, every QR scan recorded at him, a stamp, every tenant could leave feedback, and I made sure his schedule included the very building he drove past and mocked me for that dump downtown, as he used to call it, the one I had flipped into a CU working hub, now full of freelancers, startups, and local newsrooms. A building where once a week he now had to check the boiler room, wipe ceiling grates, log airflow reports, and get personally acquainted with humility. I never humiliated him in public. I never raised my voice. I did not have to. I let silence speak, and I let routine to the poor shops the new normal. But the real fallout, one that cracked his pride into pieces, came from the rest of the family, because I didn't just stop at hiring him. He updated my will, because apparently paperwork can be louder than shouting. I donated to Lear's kids' private school under my companion name, which made the gossip travel faster than Wi-Fi, and I offered Mason's firm a property management contract for one of my satellite buildings on the outskirts of town. When Thepapur came in, he read the owner's name and called me immediately. Wait, you own this place? He asked. Since the last quarter, I replied. He paused. Why offer me the contract? Because I believe in giving people opportunities, I said with a calm. He couldn't argue with you trying to make a point. No, I said, you made the point years ago. I'm just letting it echo. He did respond after that. But over the next few months, word spread quietly, subtly. The family group chat got so quiet, I thought the phones had entered witness protection. The holidays became more awkward. Nobody toasted anything anymore, which honestly improved Thanksgiving by 40%. And at the next Thanksgiving, for the first time in over a decade, I hosted dinner, because sometimes the plot twist needs a dining table, not because I missed the noise or the rituals or the empty compliments, but because I wanted to change the story. The table was long, set with dark green napkins and gold accented plates. Lila helped organize the caterer. A few of my close friends came along with their families. Mason showed up alone. His wife had a thing near Camille, dragging her husband and kids, eyeing the place like she was casing it for comparison. Dad arrived last. He didn't knock, he just stood outside until someone opened the door. When he walked in, I noticed something had changed, not in his face, not in his voice, but in Thew. He didn't look at anything, not the chandelier, not the art, not the velvet curtains. It was like he'd trained himself to avoid measuring, avoid reacting, avoid being seen. Seeing, I let the room settle before I stood at the head of the table. Everyone turned to me and erased my glass. The old roles, I said, the ones we at grower. Few chuckled, some looked uncomfortable. Dad said nothing. I continued to new beginnings, earned, not handed. Lia looked down at her plate. Mason cleared his throat. To the people who build quietly, I did. To the ones underestimated, dismissed, and ignored. Now the silence was thick. And to the ones who learned, sometimes too late, who the real builders were all along, I clinked my glass gently against the one in front of me, then took a sip. Nobody said a word after dinner, while theaters made polite conversation or hovered around the dessert table. Dad stepped out onto the back patio. I followed. He didn't look at Emiya. Don't know what you want from me, he said quietly. I come to work. I don't complain. I stay out of your way. I don't want anything, I replied. Not from you. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly. I'd never seen them do that before. I'm sorry, he said. Not loud, not polished, not Instagram apology polished, Betrayal, and I nodded okay. We stood there for a while just breathing in the cold air. He didn't ask for more, I didn't offer, but when he came to work that Monday, he was 15 minutes early and has stayed late months past then. A year his contract ended, but I extended it. Slightly better pay. Same role, he never asked for more, never overstepped. Something in him had settled, not submission, exactly, just reality, and over time, the tension eased. We never became close. No big father-son movie scene, no magical catch in golden sunlight, but one day, I saw him pause in the lobby of one of my buildings, look up at the company logo on the wall and nod to himself. It was barely a gesture, but it was enough. He knew in final peace of revenge was realizing I no longer needed revengeth power he held over me for decades. His approvalis recognition, his validation was gone. I took it back, not by force, but by becoming impossible to ignore. My revenge was not making him suffer. It was making him see, and he did every single day until the end, and the last words he ever spoke to me were these: "You built something I could not even imagine it."